Former New York City Police Commissioner and MSNBC law enforcement and counter-terrorist analyst, Commissioner Bill Bratton. Commissioner, 2 more packages found this morning, one to Robert De Niro. What do you make of all this?
Well, quite clearly that there's an effort being initiated to create fear, which it certainly has.
Yeah.
Good news today is that the FBI now has a number of these devices that they are going to be in a position to disassemble to determine their functionality, were they ever intended to actually function, and if so, how, in terms of how were they supposed to be detonated, and if not, well, then that changes the focus from trying to cause bodily harm to effectively creating fear. So my sense is by hopefully the end of the day, with the expertise they have down there, the multiple devices they get to work with, that will be a significant step forward as to were these things ever capable of functioning. And also the design of them, the idea of where did the idea for the design come from, similar to what he was just describing. They have the ability to go back through the internet, who's putting out designs for this type of device, who's been basically subscribing to that site. The building back of the investigation is going to be assisted tremendously by the fact there's so many of these things, 10 of them. And there's the potential for a slip-up. For example, what he just described, that's only in one of them. So was that a slip-up, or was that something intentional to put that in there? So they have that capability with so many of these things out there to really advance the investigation of the case significantly.
What does it tell you that none of them detonated? Do you believe that this person, he or she, was just trying to scare us and create chaos, or they just didn't know how to get the job done?
Well, so often in these instances, the device is intended to go off when the package is open. To the best of my knowledge, that the information that's out there at the moment, these were contained in an envelope. There was no attachment to the envelopes, or as the envelopes opened, they would trip a device. There's been some discussion about a timing device on it. Well, these things are being found over the space of several days. So what was the timer set for, with no guarantee when it would in fact be opened or where it would be at any given time? There's also some discussion that 2 of them, the CNN and the George Soros devices, may have been not delivered by the post office, but potentially CNN, maybe a courier. George Soros, maybe somebody actually dropping in the box. That gives you additional ability to investigate, because you then start checking every camera within a significant radius to see 3 o'clock in the morning, did a car go by up in George Soros's neighborhood where there's not a lot of traffic? And the buildup of these investigations is, from my perspective, there's so much to work with here at this time. And they're working feverishly to try and get to the motive, because the dissension it's causing, the fueling of the political debates that you report on so significantly here in other news stations, this has really ramped that, it's like throwing fuel on the fire.
All right, I want to pull that picture up again of that device, the one where we have the picture and you can see that get her done. So to your point, Commissioner, this could be a slip-up, and you say there's so much to work with, but is that the case, or are we now going into needle in a haystack territory? We've got 2 new packages. It's not just prominent Democrats. It's George Soros. It's Robert De Niro. It's almost as though the scope has gone even wider.
Scope, other than, I think the pattern is clear that one of the things law enforcement is looking at clearly is so many of these people have been the subject of attack by the president and others over the last several weeks.
He's attacked a lot of people.
Well, that's
and we're suddenly going to go look for people the president's attacked?
What I'm saying is that is part of what they're looking to do. The NYPD, within the last several days, literally fanned out to Schumer's office, to Gillibrand's office, to literally anybody that might have been potentially a possible target. NYPD fortunately has that type of manpower, they can do that. But just think of some of the people that have been so prominently attacked in recent weeks, that law enforcement will certainly be putting their officers on notice, be very mindful of anything that appears out of the ordinary, particularly until they get to the bottom of what was the motive here, and hopefully who was the source of it.
Commissioner, Mayor de Blasio said earlier this morning this could continue for days or weeks, but people should go about their daily lives and their business, and they should not be scared. Do you agree with that? We are a week away from Halloween. Here in New York City, people will be walking around the streets, even this Saturday night, in masks, with bags, people not identifying themselves, kids all over the place, drunk people Saturday night. Should we be concerned?
That should be concerned, and that's effectively what the mayor was saying. It's what I've been saying throughout my career.
I mean,
particularly
Halloween's
since
always a
9/11.
scary night.
Well, Halloween's, think of the good old days when Halloween was scary because concerned about a razor blade and an apple.
Don't I know it?
And having, unfortunately, instances of syringes. So there's always been that element, but the reality is that this individual or individuals, what they're trying to do is sow fear. And the way you deal with fear is through awareness. There's trying to find ways to bring us together rather than divide us around the idea of not letting him or her, whoever, create fear. So the mayor's remarks are the same remarks I made when I was in the business and even now in consulting.
Hey there, I'm Chris Hayes from MSNBC. Thanks for watching MSNBC on YouTube. If you want to keep up to date with the videos we're putting out, you can click subscribe just below me or click over on this list to see lots of other great videos.